Hello and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator and the Curated Connections Library. We're here to talk about teaching art with purpose and inspiration, from the daily delights of creativity to the messy mishaps that come with being a teacher. Whether you're driving home from school or cleaning up your classroom for the 15th time today, take a second, take a deep breath, relax those shoulders, and let's get started. Hi everybody, it's Cindy Ingram from Art Class Curator, and today in our episode we have another interview with Jenn Easterling, who works at Art Class Curator with me, and she is brilliant, and we have a lot of great stories of art connection moments with our students. So we talk about the types of lessons that we offer at Art Class Curator and what an impact they have on us personally as teachers, as well as our students, and the fun that we have, the insight that we have. So we have a lot of fun stories to share about moments we've had in our classroom. And before we get started, I want to let you know that every single lesson or artwork that we talk about in today's episode is actually available in our Curated Connections library. All of these are in the membership. We have what we newly call Sparkworks, which we formerly called Artwork of the Week. And these lessons have the artwork, has a PowerPoint, discussion questions, engaging activities, projects that connect to the artwork, artist bios, all sorts of stuff about the artwork, any worksheets that you need to present these lessons to your classroom. So if you like any of these lessons that we talk about and you want to give them to your students, we do have all of the resources available to you in the membership at artclasscurator.com/join. It's closed currently. We will be opening again in August. And you can get on the wait list now if you're not already on it. So these lessons are so fun and so exciting. And these stories here today really speak to, what this brings to you as the teacher and your own personal job satisfaction, your own personal connection to art, your own personal connection to your students. But they also bring so much to your students too: the fun, the engagement, the energy, the connection, the learning about art, the learning about themselves. All of that is infused in these lessons. So I hope you see that when you hear our interview today. So without further ado, we will jump right into the interview with Jenn Easterling. I am so excited to welcome Jennifer Easterling back to the podcast. Welcome back, Jenn.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
So Jenn has been on the podcast, I think, 2 or 3 times at this point, and she is the education manager. We keep changing it. We'd like to say your title different every time. She creates the lesson plans, the curriculum for our membership, the Curated Connections Library, as well as our curriculum, the Perspectives curriculum that we're selling in partnership with NASCO. But before she was working with Art Class Curator, she was actually a member and just one of our community members. So Jenn, can you kind of tell us about you and your experience teaching and how you ended up at Art Class Curator?
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, my name is Jennifer Easterling, and I have been in the classroom for 11 years, and I taught K all the way through 12 through that experience, but spent most of my years teaching high school, and the last few years teaching high school and middle school. So I've covered the gamut. My studio experience is teaching all kinds of drawing and painting and a little bit of everything within the classroom, and then mixing in art history. So at first I hadn't heard about Art Class Curator, but I moved over to a small private school that had me teaching 7th through 12th all day, every day. And I kept thinking, what am I going to do with all these kids and just, the wide range of ages and experiences and, just skill levels. And so that sent me to the internet, just searching for different things, because I had taught middle school, but not a lot. I'd done it some. And so I, just trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I'd actually bought some other curriculum and thought, okay, this will work. And then I came across Cindy's website with Art Class Curator, and I started going through it, and I was like, oh, this is so much better. Like, oh, I like this so much more. I really liked what I was seeing and the content and the way it was built to connect with students. And so I ended up returning the other curriculum and then becoming a member of the at that time, it was just Art Class Curator. And so I took that into my classroom, and I was able to do some of the lessons with all of the kids, all 7th through 12th grade. And it was so much fun to watch the differentiation between all of them. So it was the same basic lesson, but then we just kind of changed it according to the age level, and the way that the students were talking about each thing that we looked at, and the way they, new things were brought out with every class. It was so much fun to watch. And I just remember having so much energy after the lesson, saying, wow, that was cool. Watching the power of just introducing them to something new and then letting them go and run with it. And the conversations that we had around the works of art, and the power of what they were seeing and experiencing, and then taking that back into their own artworks as they then created projects to go with what we saw, or somehow inspired by, or whatever. It was really fun. And, I really loved it. And so, yeah, after doing that, I've been kind of helping Cindy out for a little while here and there. It started off as a summer job, just helping kind of reformat some things. And from there, it kind of took off to more and more. And now I am working with Cindy full time, writing lessons and working on those powerful connections that you can take into your classroom.
Oh, I love it. So if you guys want to learn a little bit more about Jennifer and her teaching, you can also hear our conversation about an art conversation about Sharon Schott's Rebellious Silence. That episode is episode 65, and it was just recently on June 14th. So I have some follow-up questions based on what you just said. There were so many good little nuggets that you mentioned in your intro there. And one of them is you were talking about how you felt after teaching these lessons that you got off of Art Class Curator and these art connection lessons that we have in our membership. Can you talk more about that feeling of what it feels like to teach one of these lessons?
Yes, definitely. It's really hard to put into words, but it's one of excitement and energy and joy, and like I feel more connected with my students because I get to see a little bit more into them and their personalities, their lives. There are days that you walk away from teaching either at the end of a lesson or the end of the day, and you are so drained just because you're either having to deal with discipline issues or management, or things weren't working, or you just I remember having those days of just I'm so tired, mentally, physically, emotionally. But the days that we would have really, really conversations around art, it was such a different feeling by the end of the class and the end of the day. And it was completely opposite of that drained feeling. I'd be happy and excited and, walk away like, wow, that was awesome. Okay, let's do this again, and be ready for the next class. And, I couldn't wait to go tell somebody about this awesome conversation that we had in the classroom. And, there's still this day, even though some of them were, 2 years ago that I have a conversation, or more, 3 or 4, there's still little things that students would say that stuck with me. And anytime I remember, those feelings come flooding back of like, wow, that was amazing. Like, I can't believe that, that came out in the classroom. So it's something that you just kind of have to experience. Like I said, it's kind of hard to put into words.
Yeah, it's the same for me, that it's so drastically different than that sort of drained feeling that you get after a really tough teaching day. You're still tired. You still had a full day. You still had to talk and process and deal with personalities all day. But yes, there is this sort of overwhelming feeling that you're in the right place. You're doing something meaningful and impactful, not only for your students, but for you personally, in your sort of satisfaction and your own personal connection to the art, teaching, to your students. You just feel so like full.
Yes. And you're like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I'm, like everything feels right. And you feel connected to your classroom. You feel connected to your kids, to your job, to your practice. You're like, it's that sense of satisfaction. You know what I mean? Like, okay, this is it.
Yes. And it's just so powerful. And I really love it too, because you mentioned something about how, even years later, you still remember things that students said about particular works of art. And
Right.
to me personally, my own personal connection to art is something I hold very, very dear. I mean, I'm sure y'all know that based on listening and reading our emails and stuff. But the whole reason I'm doing this is because I have a really strong personal connection to works of art. And I know what it gives me, and I want everyone else to experience that too. And I want our students to experience that. But this teaching works of art to students fuels my own connection to the art too. Like I see it through different eyes. I experience it through different lenses, and it just adds more layers of joy and interest and intrigue and insight into these things, these works of art that I love so much. So that's another thing that it brings.
Well, and it's also fun to, you see it on a screen or in a book, on the computer, on your phone, and then you talk about it in class. You're like, oh, this is so cool. And then to go see that same work of art in person, it totally changes your perception and your perspective of it. And you're like, oh, that's the work of art we've been talking about. It just totally changes it. It's amazing. And it's fun to take kids to go see those works of art, after you've talked about them in class. Again, it's hard to put into words, but it's so fun to watch and experience.
Yeah, it's like seeing an old friend. You've seen it so many times, talked about it so many times, and then you just are in a museum, or especially when you're not expecting it. I love when you're not expecting it. And you just turn the corner, you're like, oh, it's that artwork. And you just and the kids have the exact same reaction. I took some kids to the Dallas Museum of Art my last year teaching, and we had done that year like an art around the world type of thing. So every unit we studied art from different cultures, and we also did a weekly artwork of the week lesson. So and a lot of the artworks I choose are ones that are local to me, mainly because I know those artworks so well, but also just because I know my students might get a chance to see them. And we had studied the Nkisi and Kandi power figures from the Congo people in Western Central Africa. And we had finished our tour. And so we were just kind of exploring the museum, and the kids they have one there. They saw it, and you could see, they just were so excited. They wanted their picture taken next to it. They were looking at it from all the different angles, and they knew about it, but then just getting to see it in person, it's just so fun to see that happen. And I think we worry that our kids are not going to make these connections to these works of art, but they do, and they're excited about it, and they love it. And it's just so thrilling.
And it totally changes in a museum experience or a gallery experience, because they're looking at things through different eyes and through different lenses. So I did that very same thing when I was at the Kimball, a month or two ago, and I saw the Delacroix, Salim, and Zalika. And I'd been to the Kimball several times, but had never really seen it. I don't know why, because, it's kind of small. And I turned a corner and I was like, oh, there it is. Oh my goodness. And I'm inspecting it up close, and then I'm seeing things that I've never seen before. And, I'm taking pictures, and the guards kept looking at me like, what are you doing? Because, it's a slow day. And I was like, just don't mind me. Just let me be in my bubble and enjoy this little painting. But, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's fun for me. And so it's fun for the kids, and it's fun to watch the kids experience that.
Yeah. And so if you're listening and you don't know about that painting, we have it on the blog, the Art Class Curator blog. I will link to it in the show notes, but it's a kind of a small painting. And I think it's not one that you, like Jen said, she's been to the Kimball many times and had never really noticed it before. It's not one that that would catch your eye from across the room.
No.
But since I worked there right out of college for a year. And so I spent a lot of time teaching with it. And then also one of my favorite, and probably my first really substantial experiences leading a discussion was in front of that artwork with a group of deaf students. And it was in partnership with the deaf school and the community college, who were doing interpreter training. And so the students from the community college were doing the interpreting. But anyway, we looked at that painting, and I just remember at the end of it, I was almost in tears with just how excited I felt by that discussion, just to hear the ideas, how everybody was really engaged. And I was so worried with that tour that I wasn't going to reach them because of the communication barrier. And it was just beautiful. But yeah, that painting in particular is just so full and it's so much to talk about. So it always goes well with students. So check that out in the show notes to see more about it. So the second thing that caught my attention when you were talking at the beginning was that you did these same lessons for all of your students. You did them from 7th grade up to 12th grade. And we get people asking, where are your 8th grade lesson plans? And I'm like, well, that's not really how it works here at Art Class Curator, because when you put up a work of art in front of students, like it's the same lesson for a first grader as it would be for a kindergarten,
Right.
for a senior in high school. You ask the same types of questions, you do the same type of facilitation. It's just what they say is going to be different.
Right.
If you do writing assignments, you're gonna vary that, obviously. But and so I feel like sometimes people don't believe me when I tell them that. But so I like to share that.
Well, and that's part of the nice thing about it is that I wasn't planning, 6, 7 different lessons throughout the day. It was one. And so I could take the one lesson and then let the kids run with it. And, with the younger grades, I might need to maybe give a little bit more of an explanation about a question, if they didn't fully understand a question, or maybe I needed to change the wording. But, I would have my basic questions there to guide me. But then the students would take it and run. And so they're facilitating their own conversation. And I've even taken the same questions that I ask my high school kids, and I'll ask my kindergartner I guess she's first grade now, first grade and pre-K kids. I just kind of change up my language a little bit, but they still understand it and they're still talking to me, about the same type of thing. And so that took pressure off of me, which is not, like in that freed up time. So I wasn't having to dive in very specifically for lessons for 8th grade, or whatever it was. I let the kids run with it, and, it helped me.
Yeah, I did the same thing. It's, I even if like the different grades would be doing different projects, there was still every week, it was always on Friday, we did an artwork of the week, and it wasn't necessarily related to the project. Sometimes it was, but it was just an opportunity to explore the world of art. And it made lesson planning so easy that day because I knew I was going to do the same thing all day. I knew that at the end of the day, I was going to hear so much insight. It's so funny. You would talk about the same artwork like 5 times in a row in a day.
Everyone would be different. Every conversation would be different.
Yeah.
And that always surprised me. It never failed. And, if one class didn't bring out something that another class did, I'd be like, oh, well, this class talked about this. What do you think about that? It's, it was just another way to push the conversation. And, that was fun. And sometimes we'd even revisit, because we always did it on Monday to kind of start off the week. So that took the pressure off my weekend, which was wonderful. Instead of being stressed Sunday night, trying to figure out what in the world I'm going to teach Monday morning, I always knew I was ready to go Monday morning. No big deal. I had it ready to go. And then we would take that, whatever we talked about and looked at with the artwork, and we would link it back, when we went into a project, like you said, whether it was related to the artwork or not, students could still draw upon what they saw, what they felt, how an artist utilized something, looking at elements and principles of art, whatever it was. Like, how did the artist use that in their art? Now, thinking about that, how can you take that and put that back into your artwork in your own way, your own interpretation, just, seeing how somebody else was doing it. And then the next week we look at a different work of art. And if we're still on the same project, okay, how did this artist now address this same idea? What can you draw from that and put it back into your own project, strengthening your own interpretation and your own art and art process. And I really loved that.
Yeah. And I hear sometimes online, I'll hear teachers say, I don't show students works of art because I don't want to impact theirs. It doesn't want them to like copy it or,
right.
And I understand where they're coming from. I can see that. But also I think it's flawed in a way because I think that the more that students look at art and they look at, every artwork is an example of problem solving. And it's an example of,
right.
What that artist did to give the feeling that they give, or to send the message that they wanted to give, or, whatever their purpose was for creating it. And so we're seeing how they're using texture to impact the emotion of the piece, or how they're using balance to do certain things. And that's going to slowly build in the students, and they're going to realize, like, what is possible with media, what's possible with composition, what's possible with symbolism. I think it's so beneficial. I heard a story from, I think this was when I was actually in college, like undergrad, but there was a student that was there. It was a grad student. It's been 20 plus years, so I don't know now. But apparently this kid had not studied art history or any works of art, and basically did his final project was almost a replica of a Jasper Johns artwork. And everyone was like, "Oh, you just basically copied Jasper Johns." And he's like, "Well, I didn't know who Jasper Johns was." I'm like, "Well," so I think that's another thing, is like learning about art history so that you can, I don't know, create something new too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you think that looking at art impacted your students' art making?
Well, it just gave him whole new perspectives on what was possible and what different people around the world from different time periods were doing. And so really broadening their whole perspective on art and just exposing them to new things. And I think that kids will come in with certain mindsets about what art is and what art isn't. And I would meet kids and like, "Oh, you're the art teacher." I'm like, "Yeah, you should come join us for an art class." And they're like, "I can't do art." It's like, that's not the point. We're not talking about whether you can or can't do art, that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But I would say, no, there's a lot more to it. We look at it, we talk about it, we experience it, we have fun with it. And it's not just a matter of whether you feel you can draw really well or paint really well. We're not talking about skills. We're just talking about that connection. And so once we would talk about it and kind of build that connection, then we could go back and we could look at it as examples on how, like I said before, how artists did certain things or how they addressed certain ideas, and then how they could take that and make it their own and use that to inspire their own pieces. And, through that, then their skills would grow. I also had a semi-open classroom. So kids were doing all kinds of things, and we would have an idea, and the kids would create their own artwork with their own media according to, kind of however they felt within that theme or that idea. And so me showing them all these different artworks was just more to inspire them in different ways, what was possible.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we probably at Art Class Curator have not been particularly effective at communicating to our people is that actually that we do have a lot of art making in our membership.
Yes.
I think people see Art Class Curator like, oh, it's about art history, but we don't even really say we're about art history anymore, because it's so much deeper than it's art making or it's art history or it's art appreciation. It's just, we call it art connection, because it's finding ways to connect to works of art and then connect to our students and then connect those artworks to the art making process too, that it's really fluid and it's really connected and it's not really prescriptive. And so how you described the openness of your studio practice in your classroom is really the approach that we take in the membership. Is we give ideas on how to take this and extend the artwork into a bigger project, but it's not really like step 1 do this, step 2 do this, step 3 do this. Right. And I always thought, since we don't have that step 1, step 2, step 3, that it's not good enough. But now I'm realizing, like, well, most teachers don't even teach in a step 1, step 2, step 3. Mm-hmm. It's more they like to take
and
it
if you want to, it's easy enough just to link that in. So with your artwork of the week, that you look at an artwork and then you've got an idea to extend it for a project. If you need to do a drawing project in charcoal, here's your idea. Do your drawing project in charcoal. That's totally fine. So it gives you the freedom to use whatever media and process you need to. It's just more the idea of how you can incorporate this idea and a project into your classroom that's linked back to this artwork. But it's still pretty open. So if you need to take it to that step-by-step, you fully can, So it's made to fit in your classroom with your kids, whatever skill level they're at, however your classroom is set up. So it's nice to have that flexibility to fit you as a unique teacher.
Yeah. Can you give an example of an art project, maybe from the membership or from the curriculum, that you think is really successful at bridging the gap between the artwork and the project, or even an example of one you did in your classroom?
So we had a lot of fun. Even during the pandemic, we did several projects that were linked directly back to whatever artwork of the week we were looking at. And it was really powerful to see what the students were thinking about and making despite all the hardships of, not being face to face and being separated and only being able to see each other via Zoom, whenever we could. So one of the most powerful projects that I saw across the board, it was after we looked at Mook's separation, and you have the man in the front, and he is just, you can see he's just in anguish and clutching at his chest. And then there's a female type figure that's in the back, and you can't quite tell exactly what's going on. Everybody has their own interpretation of, what's happening in this scenario. But we looked at it, but you could feel, that he was really in anguish and in pain over something, whether that was heartbreak or, death or loss or, she broke up with him or she, we don't know. There was all kinds of interpretations by the students, but we use that to then inspire them to create an artwork about separation and things that they were feeling right then in the middle of the pandemic. School had just been shut down, for the rest of the school year. And so we knew we weren't going back, but we were all everyone was still really scared about, what's going to happen, what's this going to look like? How's this going to play out? And, now especially that everybody's kind of locked down in their homes and they're being separated from their friends and school and, all the fun end of the year activities that we'd always be in. And they were creating, there were several that really stuck out, but one student, he drew himself and with his eyes closed, and he drew a mask on, and then he surrounded himself by all these little coronavirus or COVID-19 virus looking like things all around him. Is like they were encroaching upon him, and it was like, but you could see it that those were being used to separate him from everything else. And was it a super masterpiece, with lots of shading and all that? Not necessarily, but the imagery was so very powerful, and it definitely got this message across that, he was feeling that separation, and loss, by being surrounded by this virus and the mask and, all that kind of thing. And then another girl, she kept coming back. She's like, oh, my drawing's horrible. It's just so horrible. But with it, like with these projects, I really encourage the kids to use something new, what's around you that you can use that maybe you haven't used before. And so she tried just pen and ink. And so she just had a, ballpoint pen, and she just drew on paper, and it was this self-portrait, and it's all in the black pen. And, she's got her hair kind of down over one side of her face and her eye. And so you see this eye peeking out, and it looks really sad and, just kind of hollow. But then all around it is all these crazy, energetic, gesture lines. And they're really dark around her face. And, they kind of lighten up toward the edge. But you feel this almost kind of darkness encroaching in upon her. And, you feel the separation that, darkness and can bring upon someone. And, just that deep feeling that she was having. And she just kept going on about, oh, it's just not a good drawing. It's just not. And I was like, no, do you understand the power that you are, getting across to people through this imagery? It's a lot more powerful than you realize. And so those were just some really cool, I was able to connect with the students and what they were feeling and what they were going through at the time. And, just, it was amazing to see what they came up with. So,
yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. And I'm remembering another one, and I'll take these pictures that we have of our students' work and stick them into the show notes so that y'all can check these out. But there was another one that was like empty. It was like a collage thing of the empty school hallways and the empty school playground. And like, it was, no people in it. And what I love about that is that it's a very choice-based project. I mean, that you gave them an idea of, how you feel and connect to the idea of separation, how you're feeling now. And this was right when the pandemic had started. But they all, they all did different media. They all took different approaches. And then each one is just filled with meaning and power and energy. And it's so powerful. And I think we learned a lot about how to do this in the pandemic, because when the pandemic hit, we were like, oh, now is the time for art connection, or like, this is the time, we're all online. Like, this is the time where we really can push this. And I think a lot of teachers did this for infused more art connection for the first time this year, because out of necessity, because it was just a natural way to bridge that remote learning.
Right. And have a hard conversation around something that is difficult to talk about. It gave that kind of that bridge, that pathway to, okay, how do we even start to dive into what is going on right now and all these emotions and feelings that we're having. That art became that safe bridge that we could now look at and talk about. And, I could see kids pouring their hearts and souls to this without saying, well, I am feeling, XYZ. It's just naturally coming out through other things that they're saying and, the art that they were creating. And so it gave me a lot of insight without specifically looking at you and, well, how are you today? Like, how can you put that into words?
Let's talk about our feelings today.
Exactly. Because, that's never going to go well. But the feelings and the thoughts, all that come out with just what they're seeing in the artwork that day. What they see today may be completely different from what they see tomorrow or next week. And that can be such a reflection on, who they are as a person and what they're experiencing, things that you don't ever see in the classroom, home life or friends or, drama, whatever else might be going on. You really get to see that, in a roundabout way if you're looking for it whenever the kids start talking and writing about and creating about all these artworks. And so it's just a whole different way to connect to your students in ways that, if you just came out and said it directly, it would be much more difficult.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important point that we talk about a lot with Art Connection is, we're using art. I guess if you go back and listen to the first episode I did to the podcast when I sort of rebooted it back in April, was looking at art as a spiritual practice. And we are teaching our students to use art for their own personal development, their own personal betterment, their own personal sort of place to process life. And, I've seen lots of examples of this, of students seeing and connecting with a work of art, and then they clearly are learning something about themselves. Like, there's one example, we were doing a project that was originally sparked by the Inki's and Connie power figures that I mentioned earlier in the episode. And part of the project was that they were, in the sculpture, they would put things in the belly of the sculpture, like herbs and medicines and, meaningful things that would sort of activate its power. So the sculpture became sort of a really personal thing to them. And so one of my students was over there in the corner, like, writing, and she just had tears streaming down her face. And she was putting her full self into it. I have no idea what she wrote. I didn't require them to show me anything that they wrote. I'm sure some kids wrote some silly things and stuck them in there. But, there were kids who really took it personal and really used this opportunity as a time to process. And I'm not saying that like every single lesson has to be these deep, serious conversations. That would be really tiresome and burdensome after a while.
For sure.
So these are just some of the examples that really stand out. We do a lot of fun interactions with artwork too. Like, every artwork is going to have a whole different vibe to it.
For sure.
But the kids do find themselves in these artworks. And especially if you choose artworks that have meaningful connections to them, that you can see that your students are going to connect to this artwork in some sort of meaningful way. That's really important when you're choosing artworks to show in your
and some kids may have a really deep connection to this artwork where other ones have more of a fun, silly connection. And it's okay. It's not telling that, we're looking at this artwork and you have to have a very deep, serious connection to it. It's not that way. Everybody's going to take out something different because, when you look at artworks, everyone sees something different in artwork, just like, between you and me, we see different things in artwork. So it's the same way with the kids. And so, and I think it's okay to have fun with it too. will, stand up and be silly or, have a fun, silly activity to go with it. But then there are the deeper, more, I guess, personally connected things. But it's just different ways to connect with artwork. So there's not always a right or wrong way to do that.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point too, is I know a lot of teachers are really worried when they bring a work of art to their students, and they're worried about a lot of things, worried that the students are not going to say anything, and they're worried that they're not going to know what to say. They're not going to know like enough information about the artwork. They're not going to know, just there's something how do I say this? They just feel like they're lacking some sort of something to
right, that they have to be well versed in everything about the artist and everything about the artwork and know dates and media inside, all that kind of stuff. And what I've learned and what you've learned and taught me is that it's okay if you don't know. And you can tell the kids, I don't really know. You're let's look, we can all look it up and research together, or we can just leave it in that whole space of wonder of, I don't know. And it's okay to not know, especially, like you say, in this age where we like to know everything. And with a phone or a computer handy everywhere, we can look anything up at any time. But it's being comfortable with that. I don't know. And let's just think about it, or let's just ponder, or let's just leave it in this world of unknown. It's okay. And sometimes I have to give myself permission to think, especially as a teacher, it's okay that I don't know everything. And it's okay to be vulnerable in front of my students and let them know that I don't know everything. But it doesn't stop the curiosity and the wonder, it helps foster that, which is a good thing. We want to foster that curiosity and that wonder with our students, because that's going to make them, better across the board as human beings, but also like in academically, whatever direction you want,
Yeah.
It's going to push their creative thought.
That reminds me of a quote that I just was recently given. And it's by the poet Rilke. And he says, I don't know if that's the correct way to say his name, who knows, but it says, I want to beg of you as much as I can, dear sir, to be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart, and to try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing, live along some distant day into the answer. And it gives me chills kind of reading. I hadn't read the full quote. I just Googled it. But, I think that that's what we're doing in these art discussions, is we're sort of living in that state of wonder, like you said, living in the state of uncertainty, of appreciating the question and appreciating the possible answers, but being okay that we don't have the answer, and we may never have the answer. And that's what I love about just philosophy in general. It's like there are no answers, and we just get to enjoy the process of trying to answer it ourselves.
Right. And I think it also teaches us to approach things with a sense of wonder and curiosity, that, I'm coming to this subject, this artwork, this person, whatever it is, it can go in so many different directions, but I'm coming to you with a sense of curiosity and wonder because I want to learn more about this, about you, about what I'm a part of, instead of knowledge and understanding. I want to know more. So help me. Let's work together to know more together and learn about each other.
Yeah. And it's often too, and I don't know that I've ever thought about it this way, but it's when we're looking at a work of art and talking about it, we're not doing it for the sake of learning about the artwork. That's not the content. The content is the exploration process. The content is what you learn about yourself, what you come up with. Like the content is more than just, oh, this artwork was created in 1919 and it was done this way, and this is what the artist did before, and this is what he was influenced by. Like that stuff is interesting and cool. There's a lot of really cool stories out there. But there's so much more in an artwork than just that sort of surface contextual information.
Oh, I agree. And I'm like, how many times have I had a conversation in class about an artwork, or, with somebody, I get excited and tell somebody about it, and something all of a sudden is revealed to me that about myself or about the world, or something I didn't know about a person, whatever it is. And I'm like, wow, I just had that amazing thought or this amazing revelation. It had nothing to do with the artwork, but somehow talking about the artwork or looking at it in a different way opened up this whole new insight to me. And I'm like, oh, well, that was kind of cool. I'm like, oh, I just had this amazing thought. Where did this come from? And I'm like so proud of myself that I had this amazing thought. But it's fun. And, I'll talk to people about artworks and stuff that, they don't have a clue or, they're not sure. But I'm like, oh, but you need to see this. Like, it's so cool. And then I'm like starting to go into all this philosophy stuff. And, well, have you ever thought about, no? And they're kind of looking at me like, what are you talking about? Like, just go with me. Just go with me. Let me talk. It's okay. I'm learning more about myself as a human being, as a person, as I grow older and, it's fun.
Yeah. And another thing too, kind of going back to that idea of not really knowing the answer is oftentimes whatever the students come up with is better than the real answer.
It's so true.
It's like, true. Oh, I don't want to tell you guys the real answer or the real meaning or whatever, I put real in quotations, but because there was one, I always showed this artwork on the first day of my community college classes that I taught. The artwork is by Luis Felipe Noé, and it's called Closed by Witchcraft or Closed by Sorcery. The name is in Spanish, so it's a translation, but it was done in 1963. And in the artwork, and we have a blog about this artwork as well, so I'll put that in the show notes as well. But it has at the top, it's really creepy and really shocking. For a college class, it was always a really good way to like catch them off guard right at the beginning. But there's this guy at the top with this kind of red crucifix in front of him, and there's these like demons behind him. And then underneath him, there's it's like a grid, and in each of the boxes are like these really terrifying faces with really dramatic expressions, lots of different emotions represented. And it's really, really creepy. And it's done in a very sort of, it's very like abstract expressionist type of style, very gestural with a lot of like paint drips and things. And it has a limited color palette too. It's like blue and red and white and a little bit of yellow. Really cool painting, and it's huge in person. It's at the Blanton in Austin. If you're ever there, they might have it on view. But we would talk about demons. We would talk about how each of the boxes at the bottom were like the different states of internal like struggle that you're going through, and how he's trying to keep those emotions away, and like all these really powerful, meaningful things. And then you read the label, and it's like, well, this was at the rise of television, and that was like the talking heads on TV, like TV news. And I was like, oh, that's a really boring answer. I don't like that one. I like what you guys came up with way better. And so I often will preface that, like, and I tell my students that whatever answer that you have, whatever answer you think is right, to whatever interpretation you are really excited about, that is just as true as whatever it says on the label, or whatever the artist said, or the art historian, or the teacher. Because once the artwork leaves the artist's hands, it becomes the viewer's, it becomes yours, and you can do with it whatever you want to do with it.
Right. And that's where everybody has different connections with different artworks. And it's cool to see those different perspectives. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because everybody brings a different interpretation.
Yeah. And even you on a different day, like me today is going to respond to this artwork differently than me 2 years ago.
Right.
Things in my life have happened that have added to my sort of, I guess, my vocabulary of emotions, my vocabulary of
well, and I think it was that artwork, we were having a conversation about it not too long ago, and someone was like, oh, it's like our Zoom classroom or whatever. Yes. And I was like, you're so true. You've got the person that's X'd out and the person that's doing this and that. So, now that we have a whole different experience with these Zoom classes that we didn't have before, that's a whole other
Yes. Oh, addition. Yeah. This artwork will forever be differently interpreted because of the pandemic. Oh, that's fascinating. Now I want to go teach a college class so I can hear them talk about it. But I don't know that I actually want to do that, because doesn't pay very well for all the work you have to do. but that's another story. Okay. Awesome. So we've talked about all these sort of deep, meaningful conversations, emotional turmoil, and all of that. Let's talk about the fun of these sorts of lessons. So can you think of an example of one activity or lesson you did that was particularly fun?
Yes. So I can think of several, actually. One of them was Rodin's Thinker, and he's got his arm propped on his chin propped on his arm, kind of squatting down and thinking. He looks like he's in deep, deep thought about something. Well, I just left it open to the kids and said, okay, well, we're going to draw or write whatever it is he's thinking about. And the funny things that came out of all the stuff that they drew or wrote, it really made me laugh, and it stuck with me. I mean, it was anything from the food that he was thinking about to some sort of future city to long lost loves. And I mean, it just went in all different directions, and it was so fun because I would take the artwork of the week, whatever we were looking at, and print it off, and I would hang it in the hallway, and then I would have them take their activities and go add it to to tape it up around the artwork. And we just left it in the hallway so anybody could see it. But every time I walked past that, I would start, giggling about something that thinker was really deep in thought about. And so that one was really fun. Another
what's
one
good about that, before you go into another one, you know what's good about that too is it was in the hall. And so even the students who maybe weren't in art, or even the other teachers, the administrators, would walk by and see that. And they are also, I think humans are naturally like this, is they're going to come up with what they think that
exactly
he was thinking about. And so they're walking by and they're having these little mini art connections as they walk through too. And your classroom is sort of impacting the campus as a whole.
Right. Oh. And there were times that I would stick up extra worksheets. I would print them on half sheets so I could cut them kind of small. And then so I could take the extra ones and put them up beside and invite people to also, who weren't in class, and they could add in their own thing, and just add it to our collection for the week. And then it would change out weekly. So it's simple. And I just have the kids go hang it up. So I'm not having to do anything besides hang up the initial artwork that week. And then I just have the kids go do it. So it takes pressure off of me of like having to hang all these things or, making sure everything's perfect. I'm like, you go do it. And, they're kind of curating their own little exhibition there.
Yeah. And that's performing so many different functions. It's showing the students, the students that are in your class, they get to celebrate their work. They get to be reminded of the artwork and kind of keep it in their thoughts. But then you're impacting the art connections of your campus, but you're also really advocating for you and your program that, your administrators are seeing that you're doing some really like thought-provoking work. You're doing writing, you're doing creativity,
right.
that's going to advocate for your program. It's really easy to do, but really powerful.
Right. And it shows more of what's going on in your classroom, and it helps with some of those perceptions that people think we're only playing with popsicle sticks and glitter all day long. You're like, no, there's a lot more deep thinking and process working, and we're writing and we're putting all things together and we're creating, it gives more value to your classroom and you as an art educator when there's so many misperceptions out there.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, what other fun examples do you have?
Another one was with Sandy Soakland, her Revenge of the Goldfish. So we looked at that one and had a lot of fun conversation. Well, then I had, as an activity, I had everyone create their own goldfish, and we hung them all in the hallway. And so we had our own little mini Revenge of the Goldfish. And so we were located near the preschool classrooms. And so the first time that they saw them when they walked down, it was so fun to hear them because they were all like, oh, wow, look at all that, And so, it was fun because everybody just created all kinds of different fish. And I would have some that were these beautiful koi fish, that had amazing coloration and scales, to goofy kind of 3D fish with bulging eyes. And then someone had like an abstract one with kind of bent and flowy paper, and we'd have little ones and big ones, and they're all different colors, and they were just hanging from the ceiling, swimming in the hallway. So
I love that. Yeah. And it really reminds me of what we talked about in our last episode that we did about Shared and Shot. We talked about the both and that, like, our classrooms can be both really serious and emotional and deep, and they can be silly and fun, and you can, make goldfish out of paper and hang them on the ceiling. It can be everything and everything in between. And it's all fun and valuable and so memorable. I know your students are going to remember your class forever.
It just, why not have fun with it? You know?
Yeah. I could think one activity that we have on the website is a drawing description game where you have students sit where only one of the students can see the artwork, and then they have to describe it to their partner, and then their partner has to draw it based on their description. And I love that because I'll choose really ridiculous works of art. One of them I chose, I wonder if I can find it. I don't think I ever wrote down the name of the title, but I should be able to find it. Hold on. But so I picked just totally ridiculous things, and I would just basically Google crazy surreal sculpture or something like that. And then I would put it up there. And so all the students who can see it were laughing, but then they would have to describe it. And, the kids don't know why the kids drawing don't know why the other students are laughing. But at the same time, they're having such a fun time. At the same time, they're working on their communication skills. They're working on their visual literacy. They're working on their communication. They're, all of that at the same time as also having, doing something really fun.
And the laughter is awesome.
Oh, yeah. And they always beg to do that again. They just think it's so much fun. But one of the artworks that I put up for that one time was called What You See Might Not Be Real by Chen Wenling. And I don't have this on the membership because it's pretty dramatic. But it basically is like a bull who's like farting a mushroom cloud. And it's like, and he's pinning this sort of demon to the wall. I don't know how to describe it, but I made my students do it. But I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can see. You can decide for yourself if that's appropriate to show your students. My students died. They thought it was so funny. And then all the kids who came later, were told about it. So I had to pick something different for the last classes because it spread through the school what artwork they were looking at, and I wanted to surprise them. But yeah, so it's so fun. But at the same time, we're doing all this really powerful learning too.
Right, and they're learning how to look at something really closely and describe it. And so you do start hearing those vocabulary, those kind of our vocabulary words naturally come out without you having to say, well, this is line and this is what it means. And this is where we see it. They're just naturally being incorporated to their language. It was really powerful for my ELL kids too, as they were learning English, and it was a different way for them to practice. And they'd ask me and they're like, well, what is this? And I'm like, what do you think it is? Or how describe it however you can. You don't have to use this specific language or the specific wording. Describe it however you can describe it. And if that means you need to get up and stand like something, go for it. And I've got some fun pictures of kids standing in all kinds of crazy ways as they're trying to describe whatever it is they're looking at to somebody else. So it gets them up and moving and, thinking about things in different realms instead of only just pure writing or drawing. So.
Yeah. It is really good for your ELL students because I've told the story a lot, so I'm sorry if y'all have heard this before, but I had two students that were working on this one time. And then one of them was not a native speaker of English and the other one was. And in the artwork, it was like, I don't remember the name of the artwork, but there were like tea kettles and the tea kettles were the trees. And so they were tea kettles with trunks. But the girl who was drawing didn't know what a tea kettle was. She didn't know that word. And the girl describing couldn't figure out a way to describe it. She raised her hand. She was like, she doesn't know what a tea kettle is. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, you'll have to come up with another way to describe it that doesn't use the word kettle. And so they worked it out. They figured it out. She ended up, I think, just talking about the shapes and kind of that way. But it was really interesting to see them work through that problem and how to solve it. Right, and they looked to me to give them the answer. But I was like, no, y'all can figure this answer out for yourself.
Yeah. So it's encouraging that thinking process and thinking about it out of the box or, a little bit different realm of, what you're used to.
Yeah. So it makes me just want to leave my home office and go find a classroom like right now.
Yes.
Yes. I want to can we do this right now?
Yes.
It's so fun. I do miss it. That part of it. I don't miss all of the drama of teaching, but I do miss those wonderful days of art connection. Okay, I know we have so many other stories that we can tell that are about these powerful art connections that students make. So hopefully we'll get to tell those to you at a later date, but we're getting to the end of our time. If you are interested in this type of learning in your classroom, we do have the membership, the Curated Connections Library, and I think almost every single lesson we talked about today is in the membership. I don't think there was one that wasn't.
Yes, right? They're all
in there.
Okay.
So every single lesson that we talked about today is in the Curated Connections library. And so you can get the PowerPoint with the artworks, the discussion questions, the engaging activities, like those kinesthetic activities, the writing activities, the Rodin with the speech bubble, that's in there. All of these things that we talked about, as well as art project extensions that we talked about. It's got everything that you need to teach these sorts of lessons. And just believe us when we say it is so fun and so powerful, and your students will love it and also will remember it. And also it will teach them so much about art, about themselves, and everything in between. So if you would like to join the waitlist, you can go to artclasscurator.com/join. There's an email form right there on the page that you can get onto the waitlist. And then we will be opening the doors to the membership in August, on August 5th. So again, go over to artclasscurator.com/join to get more information about that. Thank you again so much, Jenn, for joining us today. Your experience
you're welcome.
Your expertise and experience here is just so wonderful, and your creativity just shines in all of these lessons. So
it's so much fun. I absolutely love it.
So thank you so much for listening to the Art Class Curator podcast, and we will see you again next week. When you're a teacher, one thing is certain: the lesson planning never ends. The Curated Connections Library is here to help with hundreds of art connection lessons and activities. Our signature Sparkworks lessons include everything you need to teach an artwork every single week. Each lesson features one diverse and captivating work of art and is complete with discussion questions, engaging activities to create deeper art connections, and related art project ideas. With unique worksheets and PowerPoint presentations, every lesson is classroom ready. Get your free Sparkworks lesson and take a break from lesson planning by going to artclasscurator.com/free lesson. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Class Curator podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes to help other teachers find us and hear these amazing art conversations and art teacher insights. Be sure to tune in next week for more art inspiration and curated conversations.